Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. We all know you're not supposed to judge a book by its cover, but I've not heard anyone say you shouldn't judge a book by its title, so that's exactly what I'm going to do today. So for today's video, I've gone through the 300 titles that are in SPFBO8, and I'm going to pick a winner based on the title alone. So I'm going to ignore the author, the synopsis, the cover of each of these titles, and literally just look at the title itself in isolation. I've gone through the allocations for each of the 10 blogs or collaborations who are judging this year's competition, and I've picked out a few semi-finalists from each, and then from those I've picked out a finalist as well, and I'll go through all of those, paying attention in particular to the 10 books that I've picked out as finalists, and giving you my top 3, including of course my overall winner. Now of course I like epic fantasy as my primary genre or subgenre of fantasy, so all of the titles are ones that appeal to me. They will follow a bit of a theme. Some of the titles which I think are pretty cool titles in isolation, I've left out because they're not necessarily ones that I would particularly read, and I'm looking for the titles that really appeal to me. So let's go and have a look which ones I've picked out. So first of all, the collaboration at the top of the list on Mark Lawrence's blog is Fantasy Faction, and I've picked out 5 semi-finalists for them, which are Imagine the Fire, The Crypt Lord's Call, In the Shadow of Ruin, Born of Fire, and The Heart of the Bloodstone. And from those, my finalist that I'm putting forward to speak about is In the Shadow of Ruin. I quite liked these titles in general. There's a lot of intrigue there, but this is the one that I wanted to put forward. Next up is Fantasy Book Critic, of which I've got 4 semi-finalists: The Broken Oath, Quenched in Blood, The Fangs of War, and The Beckoning Void. Again, there's a lot of intrigue just looking at the titles alone on here, but the one that I've chosen to put forward is The Fangs of War. Then we have 6 titles I've picked as semi-finalists from Lynn's books and The Critiquing Chemist. These are The Blood of Crows, The Lich of Fandorian, Memories of Blood and Shadow, Falling Through Stars, The Hellborn King, and The Hidden Blade. I've read one of these titles, The Hellborn King, and I do like the title just in isolation. There's a bit of intrigue once more with some of these. Falling Through Stars, for instance, The Lich of Fandorian, I do quite like. It's got a very kind of classic fantasy feel about it, but I think maybe it's better suited to a chapter title when you know what these things mean. Overall though, the title that I'm putting forward as my finalist from this batch is The Hidden Blade. Then we come on to Book Nest, and I've picked 5 semi-finalists from this group. They are The Binding Tempest, Wake of the Phoenix, The Assassin of Grins and Secrets, Queen of the Warrior Bees, and Horns of the Hunter. I really quite like Queen of the Warrior Bees. It's not necessarily a typical fantasy title because you're talking bees, but they don't necessarily mean bees. I would probably from this one take that to mean kind of a group of people, an armed force, for instance, maybe some elite warriors in the Queen's army or something along those lines. But I think it's really intriguing title. It's not the one that I'm putting forward from this interesting group though. I've gone for Wake of the Phoenix. Moving on to the Weatherwax report, and I've got 4 semi-finalists here: Spirit of the Dragon, Crown of Madness, The Lost King, and Price of Honour. There's a kind of bit of a theme in here with royalty and honour and loyalty and that kind of general feeling for me, and the one that I've picked out as my finalist from this batch is The Price of Honour. Next up, it's Fantasy Inn, and another 4 semi-finalists from this batch. I've got The Sorcerer Within, Oath Broken, A Blade for Hire, and The Last Dragon Keeper. And this one maybe not so much of a surprise as someone who really likes dragons in my fantasy. I've gone for The Last Dragon Keeper as my finalist from this batch. From Becky M, we've got another 6. We've got Whispers of Ruin, Lightblade, Beneath the Shadow Dark, A Gathering of Chaos, Fate's Long Shadow, and The Wolf in Winter. I really think The Wolf in Winter just sings David Gemmell to me. We do have Winter Warriors and In the Shadow of the Wolf, and I think it really fits in with one of his titles. Lightblade is a bit odd for me. I don't generally tend to go for single word titles, despite the John Gwyn's Over My Shoulder, but I think that one does have an intriguing kind of flair to it. The one that I've picked out as my favourite though from this batch to put forward as a finalist is Whispers of Ruin. Then we've got Before We Go blog, and I've picked out 3 semi-finalists from this one. They are Empire Under a Dying Sun, The Killer and the Dead, and Spirits of Vengeance. Although I didn't have a vast number of titles that I wanted to put forward from this one, I do think these are all pretty strong titles. The one that I've picked out as my favourite though to go forward as a finalist is Empire Under a Dying Sun. Queen's Book Asylum is another one that I've picked 6 semi-finalists from. We have No Land for Heroes, The Guardians of the Ward, The Talon's Fury, The Banner of a Broken Orc, Shattered Gods, and The Umbral Storm. I think there's some really strong epic fantasy titles here, and there's a lot of interest, a lot of intrigue in these, trying to figure out what's the meaning behind the title. And overall, you can't judge a book by its title, but I really do like some of the ones that we have here. The one that I'm putting forward as my finalist from this batch is No Land for Heroes. And now we come to Bookborn, my group, and we've got 3 semi-finalists going forward: Where Blood Runs Gold, The Blood of Outcasts, and Guardians of the Light. So for this one, again, not so many titles put forward, but I do quite like these ones. I like the kind of cleverness of Where Blood Runs Gold, even if I do automatically say it in my head as cold each time I read this one. The one that I've put forward as my finalist from Bookborn's group is Guardians of the Light. So now I've got my 10 titles. Which one is my favourite? Which is the winner of SPFBO, just based on how much I like the title? So all of these sound like titles that I would want to read just based on the name of the book itself. Obviously you would then go into the synopsis of them, but just in terms of piquing my interest, these all did a really good job. In The Shadow of Ruin, I really want to find out what that's all about. Why are we in the Shadow of Ruin? What is the ruin that we are in the shadow of? It's a really interesting title for me, and one that I could definitely see on my bookshelves. The Fangs of War is the type of title that really sings to people who like a good epic battle, and judging by the books around me on my shelves, you can tell that that is definitely the case with me. I do like a good bit of fantasy battle, so this title really does a good job there. For The Hidden Blade, I would definitely expect an assassin story. I do quite like those, they can be a bit overdone, but overall I have had some quite good success reading assassin type stories, and this is a title that would feel right at home in that company. Wake of the Phoenix, we don't really tend to have too many phoenixes in the fantasy stories that I read, but the typical kind of imagery with a phoenix is the rising from the ashes. So Wake of the Phoenix for me really makes me think of someone rising up from the ashes. Maybe this would be a good sequel for In the Shadow of Ruin. The Price of Honour interests me because I like that kind of theme, honour and loyalty in a fantasy story, and people doing things because they are loyal to people. It makes me think here, what are the consequences of being loyal to somebody, and what might you have done if you weren't loyal to that person? It's an interesting title for sure, and one that I could definitely see fitting in with the type of fantasy that I read. The Last Dragon Keeper, well, there's enough said there really with dragons, and it sounds like the end of dragons, or maybe it's the end of people rather than the end of dragons. But I do like a nice dragon riding story, and that sounds like what I would get from a title like this. Whispers of Ruin, this sounds like maybe it would be the first story in that trilogy, followed up by In the Shadow of Ruin and then Wake of the Phoenix. But again, it's one that really piques my interest, trying to find out what's happening here. Is it a country or countries on the brink of war? What's going to happen to bring about this ruin? So again, it's one that really interests me because there's questions just from the title on its own. Empire Under a Dying Sun, I think, is another really interesting title. There's a lot of that kind of theme of destruction and ruin within these finalists that I've picked, and a dying sun would definitely bring about ruin. So of course I don't know if it's literally a sun that's dying, or if the sun is a name for a monarch or something along those lines, but that's a question that I'm interested in finding the answer to. No Land for Heroes sounds to me a bit like a grim dark title, a really gritty title where there's either no heroes or heroes just can't come out on top because of the type of world they live in. I think this one really sounds like it would be at home along with Joe Abercrombie, Best Served Cold, Before They Are Hanged, Last Argument of Kings, No Land for Heroes. It just really fits in with that Abercrombian kind of vibe. And Guardians of the Light, this sounds like a real light against dark kind of story for me, and going back to my classic roots, I really do like good old good against evil, light against dark, and Guardians of the Light kind of makes me think of maybe the darkness is winning and there's a last bastion of hope holding out and trying to protect the light and keep it from being snuffed out. So there's some really cool titles overall, and the questions behind them and where my imagination goes for each of these titles is obviously the really cool thing here, because there are so many options, so many different pathways that each of these titles could go down, both the 10 that I've picked as my finalists and all of the other titles as well. But I am here to pick a winner, so I've got my final 3 picked out, and in reverse order then they are The Price of Honor, which I really like. It just sounds like a nice, solid fantasy title. In second place, Empire Under a Dying Sun. Again, sounds like a nice, solid title. There's a bit of a classic feel to this title, and I really like the idea behind it. And then the winner, my number 1 favourite title from SPFBO8, is No Land for Heroes, which I think is just a really interesting title. It puts a picture in my mind of a really interesting world and some dark, gritty stories, and although I know it's not necessarily what the actual story is, especially because I know that this one is kind of a gas lamp western fantasy, so really not my style, the title nonetheless is one that I really appreciate. So that's my attempt to judge books by their titles anyway. Let me know in the comments down below what you thought of my picks, including of course my winner, and what titles you would have picked to be your finalists or your overall winner. While you're down there, don't forget to give this video a thumbs up if you appreciate the content, hit subscribe if you haven't already done so and you want to see more from me in the future, including more SPFBO content. If you want to interact with me elsewhere, you can find all my social media and support the channel links in the description box below this video, including my book club Discord and my Patreon. Do come along and join in, we'd love to have you involved. That's everything for today though. I hope to see you in the next video sometime soon, but until then, as always, take care of yourselves, read some good books. Bye for now.